G'day everyone, Dicko here with another kick-ass walkthrough. This is the third and I would say final official part of this tutorial series on creating characters without any sculpting, and we're going to do a little bit of clothing. So I'm going to be using some reference, so it's always good to have some reference on hand. We're going to jump right in, and I'm quite lucky with this one because the dress that I'm going to create is fairly simple. And it came at a request from the patrons themselves. So I actually put a vote up for what season that Daenerys should be wearing. And they've chosen this one here. And thank fuck for that, because it is far simpler than so many other of her clothing. So thank you for that. So we're going to start off by basically blocking out the dress itself. So we've got some interesting parts going on here as well. Some of it will be simulated, not as much as you may think, because I am building this on the assumption that you all have a real dog shit computer. So anyone should be able to follow this tutorial. Anyone should be able to make this dress. You do not need to worry about simulating too much. It's only at the end really that we're going to do it, and I got a little trick to help save some computing power with that as well. So yeah, let's move right into it. So yeah, let's just start with the top half of this dress. I'm going to put this window aside, and then we're going to start to worry about the bottom as well. So I'm just going to put that to my other monitor, and we have our model here. And it might actually be useful in this case to hide the hair, just to avoid any distractions. And I will be talking about, there will be a supplementary video after all this, just about applying the hair and doing some basic texturing. So we're going to do that in the next video. It won't be officially about sculpting, or not sculpting, modeling, but it'll be about the sort of cleanup. Anyway, hide away that hair, and let's create a new object. We're going to reset our view, our 3D cursor to the center, and we are going to create a basic cube. You can also go with a plane as well. We don't need to worry too much about it, things, but I might go with just deleting these faces. And then let's move that up to the top, because what we're going to create to start off with is just the cuff, I guess you can say. And even then, they're just linked up with the strings. So in all honesty, we can probably get away with just doing don't have to worry about making it circular. We can just split the top and bottom and then go under the shoulder. So that's going to be really cool. So actually, you might go ahead and delete these as well for now. All right, let's move this up here. The back is already kind of in place, and I'm doing this in edit mode. I'm not doing this in object mode, so keep that in mind. Let's go ahead and move those up. And I will mirror this, don't you worry. We're going to move this into place, bring this into place here. And I think we're at a safe spot now to start mirroring our objects. So we're just going to go ahead and do that now. I'm going to delete the sides here. And we're going to jump straight into the mirror modifier. Because the origin's at the center, we don't have to worry about designating a pivot point. So just go ahead and mirror that, turn on clipping, and we should have enough geometry at least to get the front and back linked up. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's go M at center, and we've got this little loop going on there. It's not a loop, it's not a real loop, it's really just a merged vertice, but I think it will actually do for our case. And eventually, honestly, we just really wanted to get this into place, just get them linked up, relatively speaking. Ultimately, I might actually go ahead and just separate them again, just to allow us to have that space for that tied up knot. All right, let's bring this up into place here. We're going to bring these two verts down to sit right on that shoulder. And we're already having to build out some geometry. We're just going to slide those up with a double tap of G. And we're going to block out our initial shapes. It's just like anything else we do in 3D. And when it comes to characters, we're blocking out those shapes. Let's add a loop here. And we're going to obviously leave a gap for that little area in the middle there for that that area. Cool. But we will need to do, firstly, I'm going to do at least one little extrusion down, or at least split it. Let's just split it with a Control R to add an edge loop. Just get it down like that. And we're going to extrude out another one here. And we're going to extrude it once more, extrude it in like so. And we're going to create a perfect circle by adding a loop here, adding a loop here, adding a loop here, and we'll smooth that out. So I'm going to push F to fill first, then I to create the loop that we need. You're going to push Control, or just push B on the keyboard. Oh, sorry, let's undo that again. We're going to push I, and then before you release it, push B so it actually sticks to that mirror. And then we can delete that face. And that will give us that loop we need for that central area of the top. Nice and clean. All right, cool. Let's add a loop here, add a loop here. And we're going to just put that into place here. Again, we're not going with a full loop around here because that's not how the dress is designed. It's literally just two sheets sort of sewn together. So what we will do is extrude this down here. Add a loop there, add one loop here, and then we can start to think about how we're going to link this up. So I'm going to link it up just above the circle. Now, actually, according to the fabric, it actually is at the base. So I'm estimating based on the design. So the area here lines up kind of with the bottom of the armhole there. Now, I want you to be aware of one thing, and that is there are a million ways to model clothing. There are dedicated software to modeling clothing. You can sculpt it, you can simulate it, you can scan it, you can do anything to make clothing. But you need to consider your limitations. So when I say limitations, I'm talking about technical limitations here because one, simulating clothing can be super computationally heavy. It usually requires a lot of geometry to get it done properly, to get it to actually simulate that clothing properly. And for most characters, most character designs, especially if you're doing this for the first time, it's not justifiable. There's no justifiable reason for you to be going down that ultra realistic route, especially if you're going for cartoony characters like this one here. You're better off modeling it straight up like I'm doing right here and learning how to shape clothing to fit the form of that character. And then if you have the ability to do so after that, practice with refining the clothing, maybe through some simulation or something like that. But at least build out that base with a polygon mindset. So again, it might even come down to the case where, like, because you're never going to see the actual skin of the character, you may not even have to model the body. So in this case, I have the skin of the character. But in your case, if you're never going to change the clothing of the character, you can just jump straight to this stage here and start modeling out some clothes. And the same principles apply here than what they do when you're modeling a character's body. Loops still matter to some degree, unless you plan on doing like all crazy simulations or anything like that. If you're going for a simplistic approach, edge loops still matter, although they are less important because clothes do deform in really interesting ways that don't actually conform to musculature, for instance. But it's still important to have a clean mesh, in my opinion. There are some caveats to that, of course, though, especially when it comes to scanned clothing or anything like that. You can just remesh it, and usually you can get away with it. But in this case, we're going to go with a practical approach. Okay, so let's just fill in those gaps there. I'm using the F2 plugin to push F there. You can get that in the preferences menu. It's already installed in Blender, or available in the Blender software by default. So be sure to check that plugin out. And I'm just sort of molding what I've got, this low poly mold of this mesh, to the body. Just sort of roughly lining it up, because I got a few tricks up my sleeve on how to get it to conform with the mesh after the fact. Add loops where you think it's necessary. Refine where you think is necessary. So in this case, I'm going to drag these verts down and sort of get that curve, slightly curved shape in that body there. I'm going to bring these in like so. And I think that will do for the upper body. Pretty straightforward. All right, cool. So with the rest of the clothing, it's really, really simple. It's just a matter of bringing down a few verts down here. Let's scale those in. Gonna bring those in. If you need to add geometry, it might be a good idea to do that around the back. Let's bring that in here. There we go. And of course, we want it to conform at the similar sort of way to the way it's sitting on her in this reference. So it kind of kinks at the hip, obviously, and then it comes out very slightly. So at that midsection point, this is where we kind of want to keep things nice and clean, like so. And we got ourselves a decent mesh. All right, cool. All right, now let's just straight up do the dress part. So obviously, if you're interested in doing pants or shorts or something like that, feel free to check out my previous videos on this stuff. In which I've done suits, I've done shorts, t-shirts, camisoles. That's all in the previous series, and I've talked about that in pretty good depth. But overall, the principles are still the same. So I'm just going to go ahead and create the length of the dress now. And then start to push out some verts, push out some geometry. And obviously you can see here that as we start to build out that the structure of that dress, that the limitations of the geometry are starting to show themselves. So we can start to just pull those verts out. We will have to add some more loops, obviously, to this structure, but I'm just getting that very basic structure in place. And this dress is not without its own complexities, and we'll talk about that in a second, how to do that. But there are some tricks up my sleeve when it comes to making this feel a lot more natural. So let's go ahead and just redistribute some of those verts into place and get things looking a little bit more consistent, a little bit more even. All right. So I'm just going to go ahead and just clean this up and get this to a state that I'm happy with. And then we'll start to worry about the little detail at the front of the dress, which is like these ruffles. So we'll worry about that in a second. All right, so what we got here is a really basic sort of setup for the dress. And if we look at the reference here, we got this really nice detailing at the front. And I want to actually model that in. I don't want to just rely on textures for that one. I want to actually model that in. And we can do that just by deleting some faces at the front of the dress and then creating this arch-like figure shape. And then we're going to create a separate mesh with these ruffles. And then we're going to taper them in to sort of fit. We'll worry about that in a second. But first, I just want to show you what I've just done with that time lapse. Very simple, blocked out the shapes and then added some subdivisions where necessary. And it's basically a really simple quad structure. If you've modeled the character so far, this setup here would be a cinch. You're not going to have any issues. You'll be fine. Sometimes I get comments on my channel saying, "Oh, how'd you do that? How'd you do that?" And like, well, the same way I've done it in the last 5 videos. It's very simple. It's just straight up. It's usually just extrusions, adding edge loops where necessary, adding structure when necessary. When is a big important thing there, and then making a judgment call about how detailed you want it to be. So for now, this detail is fine. And I want to be aware of this, okay? So I got a little trick up my sleeve on how to get some simulation in this dress, but we're going to start off by firstly Just seeing how this looks like when it's subdivided. And that's looking all right. Let's shade smooth that. And you'll notice that the corners, at the very least, are sort of subdividing as well. They're starting to smooth out a little bit. But there's a little trick you can do inside the subdivision modifier that is underrated. And that is to go to the settings under the Advanced tab, and under Boundary, Smooth, turn on Keep Corners. And that will actually keep those sharp corners on any non-manifold mesh. So any mesh that's not solid, it will actually keep those corners. It actually behaves a bit more like Maya's subdivision, smooth shade preview. You'll also notice that just by turning on the subdivision, we can see we have one limitation with this current setup, and that is that like the curvature around the dress is looking a little bit stretched. We can alleviate that with a little bit of an edge loop, adding an edge loop around that edge there. So let's just turn off that. Let's just turn off that subdivision for now. Let's isolate that for now. And very simple, we're just going to select this edge loop here, around here. Not this part, not around the chest, just around the bottom. Select this edge loop here, and we're just going to do an extrusion inwards. Just extrude that in, and then grab that new loop that we just created, and we're just going to smooth that out. Let's smooth that out a little bit. We'll bring in those corners again in a second, but you'll see that that stretching is minimized because we've added that loop. All right, let's just bring those back into place. Let's get out of isolation selection and fix up those corners. You can turn on soft select for that. Just bring it up a little bit. Soft select turned on? No, it's not. Let's turn that on. There we go. There we go there. Bring them back in. And a little bit of sculpting will probably help out with this as well. But let's just bring those in, up. Like so. And we can get those up and running as well in a second. But I have a little trick for that one that will help us minimize this thing. And we're going to start off by deleting that subdivision for now, because I've got a little plan for that. We're going to go to the mirror modifier. We're going to apply this. And to get that perfect circle around the chest there, we're going to go to our preferences. And you're going to look up for a plugin called Loop Tools. Turn that on. And then we're going to select this loop. Let's just make a new edge loop there as well. Select this loop here. Go to View. No, not View. Tools. Where are we? Tools. Where the fuck are we? Or Edit. Edit. There we are. Under Loop Tools. And turn on Circle. And that will fully circularize that mesh. And you get this nice perfect circle. If you want to make it a little bit less overlap, you can probably circularize just the edge loop. But that only works when you have the mirror modifier applied. Okay, make sure that's applied. For this part, we can actually just edge slide things or just smooth things out. That way we can get a softer transition. Probably get away with another subdivision there. And there we go. All right. Once you're happy with that, we're going to grab the sculpt brush and just smooth things out ever so slightly. Make sure you don't touch that area. You can always fix it up again if you have to, but just give it a bit of softer brush. Make sure you got mirroring turned on, otherwise you're going to fuck up the symmetry. And we're just going to soften that out a little bit using the mouse. And that should be fine and dandy. All right, cool. Now, if you want to have the geometry conform to the body even closer, but you don't want to fuck up the dress, the actual bottom half of this dress, what we're going to do is go into front view, go into wireframe view, select the vertices that represent the upper torso. And I actually might go ahead and clean that up even further. Let's just get those closer already. But you can see here that we have it not quite perfectly, it's not perfectly sheer to the body. You know what I mean? It's not sheer to the body. So if you want it to be ultra sheer, this is the trick. Go to the into edit mode, select this part of the body that you want it to be sheer. We're going to go to the vertex groups, push plus, push assign, call this mask, just for your clarity, the sake of clarity. And then we're going to go and add a shrink wrap modifier. And this shrink wrap modifier will actually conform to anything, will make this mesh conform to any part of the mesh that you assign to it. So in this case, we're going to make the target the body itself. So if we go to target, click that, you'll see that the whole thing is trying to sort of literally shrink wrap around the character. But we only want the upper part to shrink wrap around the character. So we're going to go to vertex group and select our mask. So only that upper half is shrink wrapping. Now let's just remove that bra for a second. And you'll see that's really shrink wrapping to that body. So what we're going to do is just offset that a little bit to get what we need. And we should have a pretty clean effect. Let's go ahead and have a look. Wireframe. Not quite perfect because of it's trying to conform to the breasts a little bit too strangely. So let's go ahead and change the snap mode to just experiment and see what works best. In this case, let's just try above surface. That's firstly working on there. So that's fixing that. Let's go to nearest vertex, maybe. Oops. Just play with the different sections, see what works. Projection works pretty well. It's projecting in a weird way to the hands. Let's just reduce that value, see what happens. Not quite working. Let's turn off back face culling, front face culling. That seemed to work, interestingly enough. Let's see what happens when we offset that. That's not working too well. We're just going to try and find a thing that works the best. Let's go outside surface. Outside works, looks like it's working all right. Let's see what we can do there. That's working pretty good. You can see it's sort of conforming. So nearest surface point and outside seems to be doing the trick. It's maintaining relative symmetry and we're getting a nicer sort of bind to that mesh. We can even bring these down manually if we have to, just to see what the effect would be with the modifier. And if we add, say, a subdivision surface to that on the top, you'll see it even conform even further. So yeah, really cool stuff. At the bottom, it's still using that underlying mesh to sort of conform, but yeah, that's all right. We can even add some more geometry if you want to. But the reason why I haven't added any more geometry yet is because this is going to be the basis for a cloth sim. So we're going to turn off that that subdivision modifier. We're going to apply the shrink wrap, and we're going to duplicate our mesh for the dress. Really what matters is the bottom of the dress in this case, but let's call the top one sim geo dress sim, and we're still going to use that mask modifier, by the way, that mask for that. Hide that, and this cube here will be geo dress, and this is the one that we're going to add more detail to. And we can still fix up certain overlaps with the dress. We can still snap things on, that sort of thing, because we're going to actually delete the other half again. And we're going to add some more detail to this particular piece of geometry. All right, cool. All right, so what we need to do is bring back our mirror modifier. We're going to add clipping again. And just like I mentioned a second ago, we're going to add that detailing. So firstly, we're going to delete some geometry. But before I do that, I'm going to go ahead and do an inset, similar to how I did the circle. Inset. And you can see it's already linked up the middle there perfectly well because of that. I've already made the function enabled. Offset even or interpolate is turned on, I don't know. We're going to delete those faces now. So now what we have is this nice loop here that will go down to the bottom of the dress. And if we were to go ahead and smooth that out, we should get this nice transition to a sort of circular effect. If we don't want to affect the bottom, we can just probably get away with just smoothing out these areas with the smooth tool. Let's go ahead and do that. And then we can worry about cleaning up the mesh after the fact. Let's go ahead and clean that up now. But this loop will help give us the structure we need to maintain that shape. So yeah, just go ahead and clean that up as you need to. Like so. Cool. And we can go ahead and start to refine this further. So we can add a subdivision surface, see how this is looking. And we can add more geometry, remove some geometry if you need to. I'm going to add some geometry around the hips just to give it some more structure. And I'm just going to use some basic sculpting to clean that up a little bit. Smooth things out. Let's turn off the wireframe. Let's have a look and see what this looks like without anything on. Let's go ahead and smooth some things out. We'll bring it back. It's all good. We'll bring that volume back in a second. But you can see it's looking pretty good so far. The skin's not overlapping through the dress, which is just what we want. And we'll add some thickness at the end as well. There we go. So that's looking pretty close so far to our reference. So it's always good to have that reference in there. And you might be wondering, how the hell do you get all these details in there? That's all just done with texturing. So we're just going to worry about the base itself for today. All right, cool. So how do we go ahead and do that ruffle effect? That's pretty simple. So what we're going to do is create a new mesh. And we can also go through and actually clean this up as well. Let's actually try and before we do that ruffle, let's just get that material at the top clinging to the body. Another method would be to turn on snapping with face selection turned on. I'm going to select our vertices and just snap them to the body. You can turn off soft select for this. There we go, just snap them there. That way we know that at least they're clinging to the body. And we can fix that up after the fact. We can offset that a little bit once we get this going. So this is another method of getting that clothing to sort of stick to the body. So let's go ahead and do that, at least with the top half. There we go. Same at the back. And obviously we can't have them sticking to the body like that close. So what we're going to do is select the faces now, turn off snapping, and those faces that are now clinging to the body, we can then use scale along normals to scale them back a little bit above the skin. So let's go ahead, Alt S to scale along normals, and just bring it out a little bit further, just a little bit, and there we go. And again, we're still getting that smoothing with the subdivision because I deleted it on the other one. So let's go to Advanced, Boundary Smooth, Keep Corners. All right, sick. That's looking pretty good. Now, we can also go through, refine it a little bit more. So just select the mesh, go to sculpt mode, and just smooth things out if you need to. So in this case, I'm just going to smooth out this area here. You can see it's sort of bumping up there. So we just want to smooth that out. I know I affected the circle there, but that's okay. I can deal. I can always bring that back with a little bit of using the pull tool. Ah, come on. There we go. And of course, it all depends on how pedantic you want to be about your design. So if you have a very strict design in mind, then, you know, by all means, take the time to really refine it. All right, there we go. Another cool feature in Blender is the smooth modifier. So if you want to just smooth things out overall, Don't be afraid to try it out. You can use the smooth modifier. That's this one here. Go ahead and just give it a little bit. You can either smooth it out or in, but I'm just going to give it a slight smoothing inwards, like so. Apply that, and you can see it's fucked it up a little bit. Let's go ahead and just smooth that out. You can see it's being a bit tricky, but yeah, I might even just do that after the fact, but an option for you to check out. It will do for now. It will do for now. Cool. So we've got our dress. Let's add a little bit of thickness to the actual material. This will be a this will not be applied, so I'm just going to add a solidify modifier, and I'm just going to add a little bit of thickness to that dress, like so. And that can either be done before or after the subdivision surface. One trick to do is to have one subdivision surface above the solidify and then another one on the bottom, and that way you'll get a nice smooth transition. And again, boundaries, keep corners, and you can see it will still smooth out some of those corners with because now the mesh is now solid. You can see that it's going to smooth out that solid shape. Again, just go through, refine what you need to refine, and we're good. All right, so let's get those ruffles in order. So again, ruffles, let's see what we can do. So what we're going to do is fairly simple. I'm going to make a new mesh, make a plane, rotate that plane, apply the rotation, and we're going to snap these corners to the center, of course. Come on, snap to the corner. You can turn on snapping here as well. Increment, absolute grid snap, snap. Turn off snapping for now again. Bring those in. And what we're going to do is line up, at least for now, the base of the dress there. And then we're going to bring up that pattern here. And we're going to bring that pattern forward there. All right, cool. Let's go ahead and make this really thin. Oh, actually, not even that. Let's just make a split right there. And then make that shape like so. Cool. So what we're going to do is add an array. And you can see we're getting that shape already. So let's go ahead and array that over and over and over again. So as many as you need, for at least with this design, we need it to be around, you know, enough to fill up that dress. Cool. I might make it a little bit wider. So I'm going to make it a little bit wider. Bring this in that like so. Widen that up. Widen this part up. Cool. And as long as your pivot is in the center of the world and it's set to fixed count and relative offset, the array should work just fine. All right, cool. What we're going to do now is, we're going to add some subdivisions to this. It's just with extra edge loops down this way. And if you want to be really precise, you can just count these and just make the same amount of edges. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, around 20. So I can go approximately 20 loops. You can see it down the left-hand corner. Let's go with 20 loops. That will do fine. And then we're going to add a mirror modifier. So there we go there. Pretty cool. And then we're going to go ahead and add a lattice. Let's go ahead and add a lattice. And this lattice will allow us to manipulate or morph that dress, this pattern, to sort of conform to the dress itself. Let's go ahead and do something like that. Actually, it'll only be on one side, so we can actually bring this way, because it's actually going to be mirrored. So we can actually we're going to put the lattice above the mirror in this case. All right, cool. So let's go ahead and add the lattice modifier. Put that above the mirror. Put it on the mesh. So we're going to lattice onto this lattice object. And then using the lattice, we can then start to conform the dress to at least fit inside the patterning. So just like you see in the pattern here, it actually tapers into the hip, actually tapers upwards, inwards. So you can do that with this lattice here. Grab that, start to taper it in, and you can start to see that effect. Now, everyone can make mistakes, and you can see here that the in this case the lattice isn't working with the mirror modifier. So I was wrong there. What we can do then is just put the lattice on the bottom, and then resize that lattice into place. Make sure it's sort of in the center of that world. And as long as you're sort of modeling this relatively symmetrically, you should get a decent result. So let's go ahead and grab both those verts there in the lattice and just push those in. And you can see here that due to the limitations of how many subdivisions I have in that lattice, we're not getting a full breadth of that effect. So what we can do is add some resolution to that lattice. So adding some resolution to that lattice will give us some more control. So you can add resolution as you need to. You don't have to do it across. You don't have to do it all at the same time. It's pretty dynamic in that regard. So I'm going to add it like so. I'm going to bring that up to suit. Widen that out. And we've got this effect going on. Cool. Now you can see here, it's not completely lined up with the dress. So I'm going to push this out at the bottom to sort of line it up there. And then we can start to sort of round out that dress a little bit as well, just to get it to sort of fit what that original shape was before. And you can see here, because lattices aren't like objects, they can't be mirroring. So you've got to make sure that when you're doing it, you got to be conscious of whether you need to mirror things perfectly. If not, not a big deal. Let's move that into place. Cool. Grab this. Doing that on the same side. If we need to push the whole top up, we can always do that. Let's add a little bit more. There we go. That's looking pretty sick. And if we now add some more options in the middle, we can actually increase the subdivisions on the vertical as well. So if you need to do that, you can. So in this case, we need to push that back out now to get that going. Move these into place like so. So you can see here, I'm just like with my body, I always start simple and work the complexity in as I go. Never do I just start adding detail on the fly. Otherwise, you just run into issues. Cool. We can lift that up a little bit too. Nice. I may have exaggerated that front a little bit more than I would have liked, so let's just flatten that out a little bit more. Like so. There we go. So this is where things start to feel a little bit complicated. So we look at this dress and you're like, how the hell am I meant to simulate something like this with this kind of complexity? How the hell do I do that? Well, it's actually simpler than you may think. And the way you do that is by using a base mesh as your basis for the cloth sim. All right. So let's just firstly, I'm gonna go to my normals, shade smooth. There we go. Auto smooth. Cool. So we got the basis of this entire dress is pretty much done, apart from the little flourishes in the knots and stuff. We can do that in a second. But what I want to show you firstly is how to simulate the bottom half of this dress without having to worry about the complexity of this geometry. All right, so let's go ahead and do that right now. So firstly, we need to add a collision parameter to our Daenerys body here. So I'm going to go ahead and go to my modifiers here and add a collision modifier. And the collision modifier is very, very, very dependent on the scale of your model. This one is like a giant. It's like 10 meters tall. But if you're working to scale, like, with the intention of rigging it and stuff like that, and you haven't done that yet, you can rig it. You can scale everything down first to match the size, or scale everything up to allow you to have more breathing room for this to work. But for the purposes of just showing you how to model things, I'm just going to go with the collision here, and I'm still going to reduce the thickness outer by about a factor of 0.1, just for now, just to see how it works, because the way that this works is that there's a limit to how close the fabric gets to touch the geometry that it's interacting with. So the fabric modifier, once we add the cloth modifier to the dress, the base dress, it will be colliding with the mesh, this mesh of the Daenerys character, right? And two things come into play: the scale and also the density of the mesh. So if you have a slower computer, you want to put the collision above the subdivision. If you want to have a smoother collision, where you don't start to see that artifacting, if you were working with a high res cloth sim, you want to put it underneath the subdivision. But that's if you have a faster computer. Put it under the above the subdivision to be safe. All right, so now it's time to come back to our dress sim model. So I'm going to save that. I'm going to hide the fancy pants dress. Let's call this Geo Dress Ruffles. Hide that too. And we're going to bring back the dress sim. Now, if you remember, we have this mask. And we're going to actually use the same vertex group as a pinning group now. Now, a pinning group is really important when it comes to cloth sim, because it will keep that part of the dress in place whilst the bottom of the dress will simulate. So let's check this out now. So if we go to our modifiers now with this base mesh, we'll go to cloth sim. You can see it's obviously added cloth and it's just falling off the body already. If we reset our sim, you'll see it just goes shunk. And it actually is colliding with the body. It's colliding with the body pretty well. But you can see here that the top of the dress is falling off the skin. We don't want that to happen, and because it's such a tight dress, we don't need it to be simulated. So what we're going to do is go into the cloth settings and go down to shape, pin group. I'm going to add that mask. So now the only thing that will be interacted with, the only thing that will simulate will be the dress itself. You can see the dress is being simulated here, but the top of the dress is not moving at all. The only problem now is that because we don't have that much geometry going on, it's not simulating as much as we'd like to. And we have a few options for that in order to make this work. The first option is basically to add more subdivisions. So let's go ahead and add some more subdivisions. We're going to have to place it above the cloth sim. And if we let that go, you can see it's working, but it's not working great. You got some manipulation there, but again, it's not working great. Let's try adding more subdivisions, see what happens. And there we go, we're starting to see something going on there. So you can see just how much geometry is required just to get the sim to work. But in this case, it's working, which is just what we want. And I think that will do for our simulation. In order to make things a little bit smoother, we're going to bake this down, of course. And let's hide the underwear as well. We don't need that anymore. because we've got the dress to cover up the skin. Obviously, if you wanted the underwear to collide, it actually might be a better idea. You don't want to have a giant butt crack in your clothing. Let's bring back that underwear, actually, and make that a collision object as well. So let's go to, let's just apply the shrink wrap to begin with. We can get rid of the solidify for now. We don't need that anymore. We can get rid of that subdivision. And let's just add a collision to that as well. Same settings as the clothing. Let's up to the body. Let's give that a thickness outer of 0.1. In this case, it could be less for you, it could be more. And let's just do that sim again. There we go. Cool. So the simulation's working pretty good. And if we look at our reference, it's kind of falling in the same way, which is good. Now, if you want to keep this as a modifier, you can keep it as this and then just move on. But if you need to fix it into place, you have to apply the modifier after you're happy with the dress design you've made. Let's go ahead and save this again. Cool. We're going to go back to frame 0. We're going to go to the cloth sim itself, and if you want to, you can even change the way that the behavior of the clothing is by default by going to cloth presets. And if you want to give it a bit more thickness in terms of weight or a bit more different properties, you can try out these presets. I'm going to go with cotton, and you will see the properties change there. The shear has changed. You can do another test, and you can see it feels a little bit more dense there. Otherwise, you can even try silk. And that will give you a much more ruffly feel to the cloth. You can see it's looking a lot more ruffles in that cloth there, and it sticks to the skin a bit more as well. If you need to, feel free to add some extra detail to that mesh as well, just to see how it falls. So you can see here, it's a bit too much. So I'm going to go back to cotton. Cotton will do the job, I think. Let it sim and see how it looks. And I'm happy with the way it's falling in that regard. All right, cool. Now, in order to make our lives a little bit easier, let's go ahead and cache this animation. We're just going to cache the first 150 frames. So in the cache settings, set it to 150 frames. Push bake. Let it do its thing. And depending on how fast your computer is, this may be a few minutes, it could be a few seconds. It's really up. It really depends in that regard. If you want to have a more accurate bake, you can increase the samples inside the settings here. And I can go through those a little bit. But for us, I think the simplicity will work just fine. The simple presets will work just fine for us. And I can put some links in the description if you want to get some more detail on how cloth sim works. But there we go, 150 frames of simulated cached animation, and you can see here it's running a lot faster now. Okay, so now the next part is a little bit magic. We're going to actually use the dress sim object as a basis for deforming our dress ruffles and our geo dress. So I'll recommend at the beginning, if you test this out, to put the next modifier on the top of the stack. That way it's not going to compute down through all this complicated geometry, the subdivisions and the solidify. You'll get better performance. And we'll just see what the effect is. So what we're going to do, we're going to add a modifier. We're going to go down to the surface deform modifier. And what this modifier will do, it will sort of glue itself, so to speak, to the dress sim and copy that deformation over to the more complicated mesh. So let's go ahead and select our dress sim. We're going to bind it. And we're going to do the same thing to our ruffles. And you can see here that I've actually gone ahead and applied those modifiers. I've made a backup of the non-modified object there. I've applied the modifiers here. And then I'm going to add the surface deform as well. Sorry, let's do that again. Dress sim, bind that. And the simulation is still cached. It's just not showing inside of the mesh. So there it is here. it's showing. But now, if we play back the animation, and this has no cloth sim on it, by the way. These have no cloth sim on it. Let's see what the effect is like. Ooh la la. Check that out. We got ourselves some pretty cool deformation there. And you can see here, it's actually affecting the ruffles as well. Now, it's not perfect, and that may be down to the original sim baked down to the original mesh. You can see here that maybe we have to bring that dress out a little bit more so it doesn't intersect with the thighs. But you can see here that the complicated ruffles are actually conforming to that underlying simulation, and we no longer need to worry about simulating such complex geometry. How cool is that? And if you had to have actual animation rigs with simulated cloth, this is how I recommend animating complicated cloth such as this. Have a base mesh, a less complicated base mesh, and then use a surface deform to transfer that that simulation to more complicated geometry. So let's go ahead and clean up this a little bit further and make sure it doesn't intersect with the thighs. So you can see if we turn on random. Yeah, let's rename this. It's overdue anyway. Let's Geo Danny. You can see that the thighs are intersecting there. So we can do a few things there. We can change the way that the thickness of how it repels, the original mesh simulation repels, or we can just prevent this from being manipulated. But I might try and manipulate the physics settings in the cloth itself to avoid it from clipping. So if you have to change parameters, you'll have to rebake. Make sure you are aware of that. If it's not working, it's probably that you just forgot to resim it. So make sure you resim it, see how you go. So what I'm going to try and do here is just reduce the amount of simulation that happens around this part of the body, just so it's less crazy. So I'm going to just paint this with an extra weight. Weight smooth. Just let's see what happens there. You can also change the distance in the object collisions as well to be a bit higher or smaller if you need to. I've actually made the weights a little bit too strong here. Okay, so you can see with a little bit of tweaking, I've got at least some of it going a little bit better. Now, obviously, we can do a few other little tricks to make it a little bit more usable. So what I would say is the simplest way to fix this would be to just go into the dress and the mesh and just temporarily, not temporarily, but go ahead and just widen out that area where the dress will be affected. So those areas there, go into wireframe mode, select that shit, and using soft select, just go ahead and just widen it out. So now let's go back to frame 1. And you see that the dress snapped back, and that's because we need to re-bake, re-unbind. So unbind that, bind, bind, and that should then still conform to that mesh. There we go. Looking pretty good. Now, if you want a greater fall off, you can see here that the back isn't really taking on that that mesh anymore. You can play with the settings in the surface deform. All right, so you can see that the simulation is working better. We're no longer got that weird overlap. So if we hide the dress sim now, you can see here that we've got a little bit of overlap, but we can deal. We can deal if we have to clean it up ourselves. We can either make the thighs a little bit smaller or the expand the dress a little bit. But we also got this issue where the detail at the back of the dress isn't really being inherited. That's down to the fact that the geometry of our dress just isn't high enough. And there's a simple solution to that, because we've got the subdivisions modifier here. All we need to do is go to frame 1 and move this surface deform down a notch in the modifier stack to sit under that subdivision. And then unbind, rebind, and hopefully there's enough geometry there for it to inherit. And you can see it, there it goes. Looking much, much better. Same thing can be said with the geometry at the front of the dress. If you wanted to, add a subdivision surface, one subdivision, unbind, rebind. Obviously that looks a bit shit now anyway. So simple solution. Firstly, I think there's a... Yeah, there was some overlapping verts. That was interesting. That was causing some issues. The second thing is to go to edge selection, Control E, edge crease, and just crease the shit out of those. At least in the vertical, not in the horizontal, just the vertical. Fuck. Let's just do that again. Let's just hide that. Shade flat. For some reason, some of these verts weren't selected. Alright, cool. That was probably down to the array not merging the verts. So make sure that when you're using the array that you have merge turned on. I forgot to do that. So just select those vertical edges before we subdivide this. Control E, edge crease, crease the shit out of that. Let's go back to this. Let's line that up a little bit further as well. Looks like it's not quite perfect. So let's just bring that out a little bit. There we go. So some manual manipulation might be in order. There we go. Shade smooth again. All right, cool. So there's our dress. Let's go ahead and bind that again. And let's see how this is working. All right, make sure that's turned on. Bind, bind. Okay, interesting. Oh, there it is. That's why. And you can see there it's working pretty well actually. And we're getting that ruffled effect. And you can see here that the subdivision is actually a bit too strong there. So again, trial and error, trial and error, trial and error. So just turn that off, unbind, rebind for a smoother effect. And there we have it. All we're going to do now is turn back on our solidify at the very least, turn on our subdivision there. And there we have it. We have ourselves a nice ruffled dress. Now, if we wanted to smooth this out a little bit further, we can use a smooth corrective modifier. Put that at the top, or no, underneath the surface deform. Same with this one, smooth corrective. And that will help to smooth out those real crinkly bits. So the smooth corrective is like a, yeah, it's just like a nice way of reinterpolating that deformity. So let's go ahead, at least with the dress that has subdivision modifier on top, we need to bind that. So we need to change it from rest pose to bind chords, push bind, and then we'll get a much smoother effect. That looks a lot more natural. And again, it's fucking that up a little bit. So let's go ahead and bring down that factor a tad. And there we go. And that's how we got this dress up and running. So if we now bring back the hair, we got ourselves our nice little dress. And if we look at the original image, let's just turn off material. Let's go with a flat color, single material, and bring back our reference. Not bad for an hour's work. Not bad at all. Don't you reckon? Pretty close. Obviously, it's a bit more stylized. Her hips are a bit wider because of her stance. But if her legs were closer together, it'd look a bit more slender. But overall, we got some nice ruffles. We got some natural looking simulated cloth, so to speak. And the overall hit to your computer is minimal compared to simulating this entire dress. Of course, it still runs a little bit shit because of all those subdivision modifiers and stuff, but the trial and error required is far less than what you need. So when it comes to designing dresses and stuff in Blender, this might be an option for you, especially if you have a slower computer. Apart from that, the final thing we can do basically is create some probably just create some curves and then apply them as meshes. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's bring back our reference. So if we look closely, it's just bows. So we can actually just like, depending on how much detail you want, you can go ahead and do that. So for instance, add a curve, Bezier, curve settings. And of course, depending on how detailed you want this bow to be, is really dependent on what you need. So I'm just going with a really simple sort of setup here. Very haphazard, I guess you can say. But if it's just an impression you need of something like this, then this is enough. Let's apply the rotation. Let's go ahead and mirror that. I'm going to add a little bit of a fake knot in the middle. There we go. location, apply to scale. Mirror. All right. Let's go ahead and see how this all looks. So I've just added a little bit of sheen to that, a little bit of color, and before you know it, there we go. We got ourselves a pretty nice looking dress. Now again, to summarize, this is just one of many ways of doing this sort of stuff. Okay. This is really just a way of introducing you to some interesting methods that you can try for whatever reason. And if they work for you, that's great. If they don't, then there's always another way of doing things. What's cool about this is that if you had to, you could apply all these modifiers and let's just go ahead and do that. Let's just go ahead and push sim. Let's make a duplicate. Hide the original. Applied. So once you're done with it, if you don't need to really, if you just need to have like a basis of some deformation and you don't need to sim it from there on in, you can just use skinning to deform the mesh. You can apply the rest. Apply this one here. Oops, there we go. Fuck that up. You can apply these and then you can refine it further. It's really up to you what you want to do. So for instance, there's a little bit of overlap there. I can go ahead and clean that up. And this is just as good for like a look dev effect or an animation or whatever. So yeah, plenty of ways to go about it. I suggest you guys give it a go. Try it in your own way. Try it in your own time. See what works for you. And then apart from that, if it doesn't work, try something else. This is just one of many ways. I hope you found this really interesting. I found it fun to do. And again, it only took me about an hour to go ahead and do this this video. So it's worth a shot. If an hour's worth of work helps you get something like this, then I would be pretty happy if I was in your spot. Anyway, enough of that. In the next video, it will be a summary of this series. I might do some texturing just as a time lapse, and I'm going to add some toon shading to this at the request of one of my patrons who have been there from the start and much appreciative of his suggestion. Other than that, all I'm going to say is thank you for watching and have fun. Cheers.